Nelson Mandela once said, his wife, Graça Machel, makes him bloom like a flower. You know, Nelson Mandela, the legend, the long walker to freedom against the white-only apartheid in Africa, the Madiba, the father of the nation, said he was lonely. And when he's lonely, he's weak. Mandela and Mrs. Machel decided to then tie the knot on his 80th birthday. It was a converge of both hearts and minds. Again, Mandela was right, because you see, Gracia Machel is so much more than a first lady. She is an African icon in her own right. And her life was repeatedly linked to moments of history. She played essential roles in two African nations, Mozambique and, of course, her hometown, and South Africa. As a young woman, she was a freedom fighter, well, a teacher first and then a freedom fighter, then became the first education minister in a newly independent Mozambique, significantly decreasing the illiteracy figures in her country in her 15 years in the service. She became the first lady of Mozambique, marrying her first husband, President Samora Machel. She was widowed when he was killed in a controversial air crash. For decades, Graça Machel has championed several causes of peace and reconciliation. In particular, she is a passionate advocate for women and the rights of children. And on the behalf of the UN, she led a landmark study of the impact of armed conflict on children, and received numerous international awards for her work. The Gracia Machel Trust, New Faces, New Voices are only a few of her initiatives and projects. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Mrs. Graça Machel. Thank you. I'm very happy to have you here on stage. I was pleased to meet you, to meet your soul and your minds the other day. I would love if these people can really know you, know your heart and your brain. And this is what I plan to do in this interview.
With pleasure.
Or meeting. Let's talk as the title of the session, My Life was Mandela, Madiba. He's an icon for all of us, for the world, okay? He's this larger-than-life figure, but he's your husband. And he was the father for your children, and he's a grandfather as well. How is it? Is it confusing to live with an icon like that?
Not at all. There is no confusion between two people whose meeting is more than just mind and heart. It's also soul. Our souls were what you could call a soulmate. So our relationship had nothing to do with the type of responsibilities of his public responsibilities. At home, he is. It's like I still find it difficult to speak to him in the past. I always speak to him as present. Whatever he's a husband to me, he's a father to my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren for him. At home, he would be like any father. But more especially, we were blessed with the fact that when I married him, he was almost stepping down from the functions of a head of state. So he had time for himself. He had time for us as a family. He could choose what he wanted to do. For the first time in his life, he could choose things to do.
Tell me about his choices. After all, he spent 27 years in jail.
Precisely because he was deprived, one, for being close and touch his own family. He had a special joy of having all the generations of his family under the same roof. I must say it was the first time in his life, precisely. So this is something which he gave a special attention to each one of them, developing the connection and the bonding which he had missed in jail. So family occupied not only a center stage of his life, but it was really the joy of his sunset, if I can call it.
Mrs. Machel, let's wake up like the audience. Let's talk about love.
Love.
Was it love at first sight? How would you best describe a relation between Graça Machel and Nelson Mandela?
I do not know how it happens with other people. But for us, it was really that kind of a click. At the beginning, I met him as the president of the ANC.
Right.
And I went to him to discuss issues which was of concern to my first family. But then we realized that the two of us had special attention to each other, particularly when he began to call me in the morning just to say, good morning, how are you? Did you sleep well? And then I said,
this is not business usual.
This is not about business.
Okay.
And then it starts to be twice a day. Call in the morning and call in the evening. It's, I just called to say sleep well. My heart then started to melt. I had never had that experience before. Then there is also that we have many causes in common. He loves children. I mean, something which brightens his eyes is to see a child in any circumstances. He will stop everything just to pay attention to a child. I have been also very passionate about children, and I dedicated part of my life to at least to make sure that the children of the world occupy a very central space in our political, economic, and social agendas. So we could talk about children, the plight, but also the potential and the opportunities which is important to provide to children. So between causes and connection of hearts and minds, it was just one step away.
Is it true he used to stop and buy you chocolate?
You are getting into lots of details. Yes, he would do so. He would do so. Okay. It is difficult sometimes to imagine that very towering personality he was. He is a person who can be in public and you can see that you are in front of dignity. He had also this kind of royalty behind him. But privately, yes, he is. He is from royal family. But in privacy, he is like any father. He is like any grandfather. Such a simplicity in his connection with all of us. And this was really, the marvel of our children and grandchildren.
I would so much like if you share with the audience the story you told me the other day about him waiting to thank the cook for a very delicious meal. Like this dignity and greatness, but yet mindfulness.
The human being in him is very sensitive to detail. Let me tell you one thing. When he greets you, he would not greet from the top. He takes seconds to connect with your face, particularly with your eyes. And he says, I'm honored to meet you. Literally, I saw people crying when he says, I'm honored to meet you, because everyone would believe that the honor is theirs, it's not his. But he never took people for granted. And coming to people who serves him or served him, you know, in prison, he would make up his own bed. He was a prisoner. And he had someone to serve him, but he made sure that he also goes to the kitchenette to help to wash the dishes. So the little things of daily life were very familiar to him. He appreciated the fact that there's a lady in the kitchen. And when it was a very special meal, one of those he would say, you know, this food doesn't go to my stomach. It goes straight to my blood, you see, when he appreciates really the dish which is served to him. Then he would call the lady in the house to say, Koli, it's her name, Koli, thank you very much for the meal. But even in banquets, I can tell a story, I wouldn't disclose which queen it was, but he was welcoming a queen in South Africa. And but he had the time to greet not only people who were in the line, but at the end of the meal, he wanted also to greet the servants, the cooks.
So this is an official
It's an official occasion, but he wanted to greet those who prepared the meal. And of course, this queen had never seen this, to stop and call people who are in the kitchen to greet and to say thank you. So she became impatient. And she would say, Mr. Mandela, and say, Your Majesty, I just want to greet those who have prepared the meal for us. I've never seen people in my long experience of being in public spaces who would pay that kind of attention. I think it had also to do with not only with his humble upbringing, but the fact that during 27 years, he was deprived, at least 18 years, he was deprived of contact with human beings. So he gave a lot of value to every gesture of recognition, every gesture of saying, I honor you for who you are, and to recognize the dignity of every single human being. And this is something which fascinated me, I must say. It was fascinating for me that he would have the attention as he would deal with the top leaders, but the very, very humble people. If you like, I can share here with the audience. For instance, how did he come to establish the Children's Fund? He was still the president of the ANC, and there was a dinner in a hotel for fundraising. The moment he's coming out, there are 3 or 4 kids who come running to him. And he says, oh, it is late. What are you doing here? And they said, no, we came to greet you. And you mean you waited to greet me? They said, yes, because we know that you love children. And they said, how do you know? And they said, we know that when you received the Nobel Prize, you were given some money, and you shared with us, children, one of the institutions which were working with street children. So he was very touched with this. He said, but did you follow that story? And they said, yeah, we have been following you. They said, we have been following you, and we know that you love us. We want just to say thank you. And that was the reason why he decided to establish a children's fund. He made sure that a third of his salary during 5 years would go to that fund to care for children who are in streets, children who live with disability, because many times they don't have the attention and the care they deserve. And for him, it was not thinking that it's good to establish a children's fund. The connection was with these 3-4 children, which took him to a much larger cause of putting children first for him.
This is Mariba, the father of the nation, but there's also Nelson Mandela, the politician.
Yes.
Tell me about that. What was his vision? Like, to talk to the others, the power of reconciliation, the enemy in the face.
You know, for him, the necessity to understand the other so that you will be able to build bridges. According to what he tells me, it started when he was in prison. There was these warders who were taking care of him. They were Afrikaners. And he felt that they were too aloof, very distant, like you are a prisoner and they are the warders. And he tried to find the human beings beyond the warders, and to even take the trouble of learning Afrikaner to be able to communicate with them. And this gave him the glimpse of the kind of walls we build as human beings with those we believe that they are the other side. Along the time, when he realized that the armed struggle in South Africa would not lead to the solution of the conflict, and he begins to entertain the idea of a negotiation, that relationship with warders was a reference for him. To say, you know, a warder who is always stiff, who affirms his Afrikanerness, can be also a human being which you touch. And he said, these Afrikaners who are in power, they are also human beings. I have to find a way of talking to them.
Tell me, or tell the audience, please, if you please, when he invited the wives of the war leaders, actually, right?
Yes, it was when he was out, and he was in the process of negotiation already, and he decided to invite the wives of the former heads of state or prime ministers of the African leadership, together with the wives of the liberation movement, in which it was Mama Sisulu, Adelaide Tambo, etc. So he wanted to test as well those ladies who were in the second line. He was talking to those who were in front line, like leaders, but the wives who are in second line. He wanted to understand the dynamics amongst them. And then it happens that the wife of Vervoerd, and Vervoerd is the mastermind of apartheid. He is the one who really, imposed the apartheid system in South Africa. His wife was still alive, but she was sick that day. She couldn't come to this lunch. And he decided that he is going to fly to her in her home to visit. He tells me this. I said, but
let me put it in context. This is the wife of what Mandela mostly and strongly stood against.
Exactly.
And he flew to her.
He decided to fly to her. And when he tells me he's going, I said, but how can you go to the length of you going to her? She didn't come. I said, no, I need to go because at the time as well, he was negotiating the so-called Volksstaat, There was a group of Afrikaners who were trying to have a very special state within South Africa, which would be exclusively Afrikaner. So he decided to fly to that place to speak to this lady who was still, adored by the rest of Afrikaners, to visit. And she said, Mr. Betty, I came to know that you are not well, and I came to visit and to wish you well to be. And the lady was taken completely aback, because when she was told that he was coming, she put her defenses, as always you would do, to be prepared to a confrontation. But it was absolutely the opposite. He came with a word of, I wish you well, before he started the conversation. And then actually they entered into the discussion of the false start, but in a relationship of humans, not of that wall of defensiveness.
I want to go back to talk about your personal relationship, because I can see your face lights up when we talk about that. But just last thing about Mandela or Madiba, the icon, all right, the public figure. What was, in your own words, the legacy of Mandela? What we could learn from him that set him such an admirable level? He could end war. He started a better, he made the world better in his own way, much better.
Look, I must say that it's difficult for me to speak about the icon, because I was too close and part of his life to detach from the personal relationship and see him as the icon. But I believe that there is no one single legacy of him. There are many legacies. And that's why his huge contribution to the world. It depends on what each one of us here decided that I want to take as a reference or a lesson from his life. There's no one single legacy. I don't think it would.
Let's name few. You mentioned dignity and greatness, humble.
Dignity, which it was not even what he would try to portray of himself. He would recognize dignity in every single human being, whether it's a child, it's a woman, whether it is an old person. The dignity of being human, it's something which always marveled me, and to be able to humble himself, to touch different people of different status and even of different class, if you like. That one. The other thing, it was this ability to connect with people where even you would say it is an intractable situation. There was no intractable situation for him. He would always find a way of turning around. That's why the present of reconciliation to South Africa and the lessons which are kept by the world, it's precisely because he went the extra effort of touching the minds and the hearts of those who were oppressing South Africans for centuries.
Mrs.
But
Machel,
yes,
right, to do politics is really tricky. You know, like you can easily be driven off your course. What kept him sincere to set the directions he started with?
I think it was basically his strong commitment to serve. Kept to serve his people, love and serve the people. And there was no sacrifice he could not afford when it came to protect the people he loved and the people he had committed to serve. I think if we can come to our days, one of the problems which some leaders are confronted with is when you have a situation of conflict, you find it difficult to put yourself on the other side and try to understand the interests which are behind those who are fighting you, and to try to use those interests to say, in negotiations, there is give and take, give and take. So positions become very hardened. People believe that they have the only truth, but in situations like this, there's no one single truth. There are many truths. And I think that's a legacy which we should, in our times, try to explore. We have worlds which are really divided with these walls. We have to break the walls. And this is the lesson of his life. We have to be able to try to understand not only those who are the tools of a conflict, but even those who are behind fueling the conflict. So that if you are to resolve, it's not only those who you can call are your direct enemy. They are those who are behind. And sometimes those who are behind are even much more dangerous because they don't take, the hardship of fighting and dying. But they are behind and they can continue for decades if they want. And that's what helped him to go beyond, the militaries, you see? In South Africa. It was beyond the generals. It was those who were behind it, the politicians. And amongst the politicians to identify exactly who were the powers behind the militaries. And I think we in our world today, we need to be able to learn from this ability to go beyond what is obvious, and also to be able to, in negotiations, to be able to take and give.
You always say, he's not a saint. He has mistakes. Give me 2 mistakes. Or 3 if you want.
Well, that he's not a saint, he was the first to say. But the one I can share with you, during the 5 years of his presidency, he was very much focused on laying the foundations for a democratic state and democratic society in South Africa. He was very much concerned with nation building. And because of that, there is one element which was evolving within society and he didn't pay attention. It was the impact of HIV in society. When he stepped down and he begins to look around and to have the time to be much more attentive to what society is grappling with, he realized that HIV was ravaging South African society, and he had not paid attention. And this is something he recognized. Precisely, then he decided to approach the government to say we need to open up and we need to give treatment to the majority of our people, because the government at the moment was not prepared to listen. It's the first, perhaps the only time I know where he had to go out and to make a pronouncement against the policy of his government, of the government of his own party. And he went even beyond. He went out to mobilize, international community to come to South Africa to help precisely in the issue of treatment for HIV. So he wanted to feel that even if it is late, he could use his authority and his ability to mobilize people and resources to do the right thing. The very first clinic in rural areas which was established in South Africa, it was in Lisikisiki, and he was there personally to make sure that he will have Médecins Sans Frontières working there, visiting many times to see how it was being, managed to make sure that it serves the poor of the poorest. So that is one thing which he felt that he had not been awake at the right time. The other thing, it was not a mistake. It was just a regret that, he knew he had no choice. But he missed an opportunity to bring up his own children. He couldn't. He just did not have a choice. And he always felt that as a father, he leaves and his children, the girls, they were perhaps 3, 4, not even 5. And he comes out, they're young ladies. Even the eldest was already married. So he missed that opportunity. That's why he brought we brought together his grandchildren to come and live with us. It was like he needed to have the reconnection of bringing up young children of his own blood. He took grandchildren as if they were his own children. But of course, you know, he was over 70 at the time when he comes out of jail. And the connection with the children who are 3 or 4 is not an easy thing. And he always felt like perhaps he is not adequate enough as a father.
Have enough power,
and I had to tell him, no, you don't have to be a father. Just be a grandfather. Because that's what you are. If you try to wear the position of a father, of course you'll be inadequate. But as a grandfather, and he was really superb in his relationship with his grandchildren.
You always say about his relationship with you, it's a companionship. It's a partnership. He appreciated your own quality. He let you be me, as you say. I am me. I'm myself. I'm not Mandela or.
You know, I believe that that's what love is all about. When you love somebody, you respect the identity, the personality, and again, the dignity of the person you love. You don't want the person you love to be like you. No, you are attracted to someone precisely because he or she has qualities which you identify with. So you cherish those qualities. You don't try to change the person. On the contrary, you build, a connection which is strengthens each other. And I have to say, I was blessed. He really found me, our relationship started when both of us were adults. It was a relationship of mature people. I had an admiration for who he was, which at the end, it was not, inside our home, there was no icon. There was no, all those things which happened outside. But at the same time, that human being, that is very humble, but very loving. If you look at our pictures, all along the years of our marriage, we would always walk hand in hand. It was like we wouldn't miss an opportunity of touching each other and showing affection. And it came so natural perhaps because both of us, we have learned what it is pain in the past. Now we could cherish highly the opportunity to be with someone you feel really there is alignment, as I'm saying, of
Machel.
Heart and soul and understanding. That alignment gave us an opportunity just to be ourselves and to try to cultivate who we are, each one of us.
You told me one of the men, someone told him, how come you kept the last name? Like you're Mrs. Machel, which is the last name of your first husband, the president of Mozambique. And he kept it. Please, tell this nice audience, what was his answer?
No, it was a journalist who thought he was going to embarrass Madiba. And he said, Mrs. Mandela, how can you allow your wife, one, she keeps her nationality, she's Mozambican. She doesn't even become South African. Second, she keeps the name of her first husband. She is Machel. Why don't you ask her to become Mandela? And in a fraction of seconds, he said, I'm so grateful that my wife allows me to continue to be Nelson Mandela and to allow me to be South African. And so he killed the argument completely. And that's exactly. He didn't need to compete.
This is so powerful. Like Nelson Mandela is saying, I kept my wife's last name, and I'm thankful for her to keep my own
exactly.
name.
That's exactly the issue of respect.
Yeah.
I respected
Respect.
his personality, and he respected my personality as well. And I think it's also a huge lesson for many of us, because sometimes in relationship of two, you have this sort of degrees that. I'm sorry for the man to say this, that the man is here and he is the one who bring a wife under his wings. In our relationship, we were a relationship of equals. And I can be very, very, very proud that I really had a relationship of equals in which I could be comfortable with myself. And I knew my husband was also comfortable with me as I was comfortable with him. There was, of course, element of admiration, because he is a person who will surprise you every day. He will do something which will surprise you. But I was delighted to be surprised, but exactly to acknowledge that's why I chose him as my husband, because he can surprise me.
Oh.
Yes.
That's very nice talk in the morning.
Yeah.
I can't stop talking about love this morning, but anyway, of course, this quality of appreciating a human being is right inside you, because you, as I said in the introduction, you are qualified. You have your own qualifications. You are an African icon on your own. You help so many children to go to school in Mozambique, so many. You are a very good educational minister.
I guess
That's
so.
this is like everyone says
so,
that.
yes.
And then you did, even afterwards, you did the new faces, new voices for women, right? You said, why you come and talk about women? Let the women talk about themselves. Let's empower them financially and socially and on all levels or aspects. Tell me about this work. Tell me, are you satisfied with it? What conclusions what lessons can we learn from Africa? And some of your initiatives were global, actually, with the UN.
Well, I was part of the liberation struggle. And politically, I can say this with no hesitation, that the countries which have gone through the liberation struggle, they have today the highest representation of women in the political life. But I realize that economically, we are not doing enough to give women opportunities where they can use, their creativity, where they can use their ability as entrepreneurs to earn income and become independent financially and economically. So I decided to establish this trust as a platform precisely to bring different networks of women. We work with women in finances. This is New Faces, New Voices. We have chapters which are in 17 countries. We have women in entrepreneurship, and we are in 10 countries. We have women in agribusiness. We are in 6 countries. We have women in the media, because we believe it's also important that women have to speak on their behalf, to tell their stories, to occupy actually the imaginary of our people, of our young people particularly, and our kids, to hear the stories of women by themselves, not told by someone else. So these networks are really growing to give the opportunities for women to be, as we were saying when we started, we were saying to be at the center stage. But now we started last year to have what we call Women Advancing Africa. We brought together about 300 women to be coming from different countries, different sectors, different ages, to set the agenda of what future we want for ourselves, but also for Africa. And that is when then they came and they said, these women, they say, we don't want to be at the center stage. We want to redesign the table. And I was very touched, because yesterday, for those who attended the talk with Ariana, it was exactly the same words which I heard a year back. from redesign the table. So that where we have to sit, all of us, in future, it is not a table where we just occupy. No, together with men, we redesign the space and the position and the rights, actually, of every one of us.
Our time is out.
It is.
But I'll have just few quick question. It's actually to wrap up. We're talking here about good governance, about the happiness of the people, all right? And you said redesign. Could you just give me a glimpse of what the things you would redesign in our world to have this happiness, the true happiness, not on individual and on larger aspects?
I would say redesigning the table begins with the changing the mindset of who is who within society. You know, we have societies which are very hierarchical. You know, there's men here, there's women here, and then there's young people, and sometimes children are those we simply, we simply give what we believe is good for them. Redesigning the table is to say, a child, it's not a human being in miniature. A child is a total human being. A young person, yes, full is a full human being. And we have to learn to listen to children if we are to be able to understand not only their needs, but their insights of how they want to be part of the discourse. Some of us here, we are 50 or 60 years old. How on earth you are going to understand a child of 6, of 7, if you don't listen to him or to her? So we need to change that mindset. With young people, the same thing, let alone when it comes to women. We have grown, many of us, grown up in a situations where we believe that a woman is something like a human being of second class. There is no second class for human beings. We are all, absolutely all, we are equal in what beats as life within us, as the ability of loving, as ability of thinking, as ability of creating. We are absolutely equal. I really love that. We might have different functions in society. As you have, one is a doctor, another might be an engineer. But you don't say that an engineer is more important than the doctor. They occupy different functions in society. Sure. Women might be occupying different functions in society, but this doesn't make them smaller or less than anyone else. The mindset is the first step for us to redesign the table. And then when we come to happiness, I'm so glad that these debates are taking place, because in essence, you can only be happy when you are happy inside. You are happy because I can recognize in you that you are me, and me, I am you. And in that respect, I have the peace of mind. I have the connection which allows me to say, yes, this is a world in which I can, again, give and take. And that redesigning will lead us to situations where you don't discriminate with women in political life. You don't discriminate with women economically. And you don't discriminate women socially, because you recognize. Again, we go back to the legacy of Madiba. The dignity in her, the ability of being herself and contribute fully in family, in society, in politics, in economy, to contribute fully. When you do that, we all will be much happier. You can't be happy when you oppress other people.
Wow.
You can't.
That's it.